Hey, good afternoon. Happy 4 o'clock. So we are going to jump right into the needs analysis on the Mastering the Buyer Consultation scripts that we started yesterday. So if you have those scripts, you can haul them out. And what we're going to do is, I had asked you guys to kind of read through the rest of these buyer scripts, right? So that you had a passing familiarity with them. And I hope you were able to do that. Let's, before we just kind of run through and demonstrate a needs analysis, I wanted to just walk you through, right? If you remember, we kind of started the needs analysis yesterday by talking about having them talk about the home that they were currently living in, right? And we gave a whole bunch of reasons as to why we were starting with that particular property. And so as you can see in the script, halfway down that page, we then kind of shift them to a conversation around, now can you describe for me the home that you're looking for, right? So they've just kind of done the do on the on their current home. Now you're going to switch them to what they're looking for. So they kind of know what things to talk about and how to deliver that information to you. There's an important memo right in the middle part of that needs analysis script page that says, remember, the needs analysis does not always follow a specific script, right? And that's important to remember, right? Script work is only as good as we make it human. And so this is really a conversation, right? The needs analysis is a conversation with you asking a whole bunch of great questions and them understanding how to answer them. So it goes on to say, you must know that the questions to ask to guide the buyers through the process, a lot of them are listed below, right? And keep them focused on creating their top 5 must-have list, right? It's why the top 5 must-have list is a part of this whole conversation. Hey, and before we actually do the needs analysis, take out your top 5 must-have list. What do you notice it says at the top? There's no such thing what? Yeah, as a 100% house. No such thing as a 100% house. And so I want you to understand that first and foremost, because if you don't understand it, the buyers won't understand it. It's why we print it right at the top of that top 5 must-have list, to remind everybody that there is no such thing as a 100% house. Even when you build a house from scratch, there's no such thing as a 100% house, because you design it, you build it, you move in, and 6 months later, you're like, I wish I would have done that a little differently. I wish I would have moved that just a smidge to the left. Oh man, now that I'm here, the view is really over here. We should put that window over there, right? So there is no such thing as a 100% house. And the whole idea of this whole process is to model for buyers that sacrifice is necessary when you're purchasing a property. We want them to understand before we head out to see the first property, simply by the consult that we walk them through, that sacrifice is necessary, right? It goes on to say, let's agree that when we find 90 to 95% house with your top 5 must-haves, it will prompt discussion about making an offer. Why does it say that? Why is that there? No. So it's there for 2 reasons. That sentence is there to remind you and to remind the buyer that when a house looks like it makes sense, we're going to start talking about whether it's something they want to buy. Right? So it shouldn't freak anybody out when someone's walking around a house saying, oh, you know what? Oh, I like that. Oh, and I like that. And you're kind of thinking, yeah, this has all of your top 5 must-haves, and even a couple of the ones that we didn't have as part of your top 5 must-haves. And so I want you to get used to asking a question while you're still in the property, as it starts to meet people's criteria, asking this question. So Donna, it kind of seems like this house has many, if not all, the things that you were looking for. I'm curious, is this something that you should be making an offer on? And I can't tell you how many agents don't ask that question. It's a simple question, right? Tell me why people don't ask it. It's the same reason. What is it?
Fear.
Yeah, right. I don't want to sound pushy. Well, you're not pushy. You sat down and had a conversation around what they were looking for, and now they're standing in it. It's part of the job to help people move forward, right? And so if you're not doing that, they're actually counting on you to be paying attention. Because remember, a lot of the way buyers respond and react when they're shopping for a property is emotionally. And so if they're emotionally experiencing a house, you have to remember to bring some of the logic into it as well. Hey, yeah, this feels really good. It also happens to check off a whole bunch of boxes. I'm curious, is this a property you should be making an offer on? Because here are the answers that come from that. One answer is yes. Another answer could be no. And either are okay, right? Nobody gets hospitalized if someone says, no, I don't think so. Instead, you get to ask a follow-up question. Wow, no, you know what? I kind of had that one wrong. I thought your answer was going to be yes on that one. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you think this one is missing? What aren't you feeling in this house? Right? And now you get to have a further dialogue that might help you either help them see past the fact that they're looking for perfection, or help you eliminate some additional homes so that you're now focusing them in on something that really does meet their criteria. Remember, shopping for a house is not about finding the right one. It's about eliminating all the wrong ones. And so the more you can eliminate and narrow that list, buyers then have a smaller, I mean, today they're lucky if they have, more than 2 on a list, right? But again, broadening the conversation to not just what's happening in the market today. The job is to help them continue to eliminate. So what they get left with is a small pool of houses that could work for them. Does that help with that top 5 must-have list? Right? Those statements and those questions are really, really important for that reason. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. One thing
That's the right one?
It's perfect. Thank you. So knowing that that's the reason for the top 5 must-have list, you know what? Let me say one other thing before we do the demo. There are more agents who don't use a formal top 5 must-have list than do use it. Right? That's just a simple reality. I can tell you that if you will trust in a list like this, you don't like the way this one looks, that's fine. I mean, this was the one that my sales team used, right? We just gave it to you as an example, right? Design one that you think looks nice, or just make sure that you put the right words in, right? Don't cheat on the top and not put those words in, because again, they're there for a reason. Oh, and by the way, what do we also ask them to do at the bottom?
Sign.
They sign it, right? Why? Why do they sign that?
Because the next time they say, oh, I don't remember telling you that.
Yeah, so right, that you sign important documents, and this is as important as they get prior to writing the offer. I don't know of a document, maybe the pre-qualification letter for the financing, but that and this are the 2 really important pieces of documentation you need to have to successfully bring a buyer to a property that they want to purchase. And here's the difference. If you choose not to utilize a document like this, not to narrow the focus of each of your buyers, you get to have conversations. A couple of years ago, we had a conversation in the Ignite room with somebody who said, you know what, I was probably the worst buyer ever. And I said, well, why do you say that? And they said, well, because I looked at 89 homes before I bought a house. And after I picked myself up off of my stool, I said, it's interesting because I don't hear that as you were the worst buyer ever. What I hear is you had the least effective real estate agent ever. Because to me, that's not the buyer's issue. The buyer's not supposed to know how to do this. However, the real estate agent is, because that's what we do for a living. And so I'm certain that what that real estate agent did was just show any house that that person ever wanted to see, right? They put them on an automated drip, which, by the way, I'm also not a big fan of. We'll talk about that later. Well, we'll talk about it now. Technology is an awesome tool until or unless you decide to let technology do the job for you. And so the reason I'm not a big fan of those daily drips is because too many agents put people on a daily drip and then wait for their buyer clients to call them to say, I saw what you sent this morning. I like that one. I want to go see it. Here's what's real. There are many of you on this call, and I'm going to use a real life example. You can lie to me if you want, but a real life example is you all get emails from me every day, oftentimes 2 or 3 or 4 times a day, right? At some point, you don't open them anymore, right? It's like, oh, it's just Rick's morning email again. Or it's just Rick's morning email again, right? Which is why I try and condense the information I want to convey to you in the subject line, because I know you don't open them, right? Because I send a lot of them. I want you to use that as an example, because a lot of you are smiling because you know you're guilty of it, right? Those of you who are newer to our world, if you're not ignoring my emails yet, give it time, because it'll happen. Just give it a little more time, right? I can't help it. I like to be over communicative. I want people to know what's going on. And we've tried mass texting and people hate that more. Even though people say, no, stop the emails, do the text thing. We tried it and everyone was like, no, please stop that even faster, right? So the idea of the point I'm trying to make to you is, imagine if your buyer is getting a daily updated email from whatever drip system you're using. Well, they become me after a while. They don't pay attention to it. It gets lost in, like, the novelty of it wears off after 3 or 4 days. And all of a sudden they're not even opening them. And you're sitting waiting for them to call about a house that makes sense for them because you think they're anxiously opening that every single morning. And that's not what's happening. So you have to be really cautious. I'm not saying don't use technology to aid you and guide you, aid you and guide the seller to the buyer to, I'll get this sentence right, but maybe the 3rd time's a charm. I'm going to start it all over again. I'm not saying don't use technology. However, I am saying be really cautious that when you have A buyers, you need to be monitoring the MLS for them 3 or 4 times a day. Like by hand with your eyeballs. If you want to set alerts for yourself and have the alert get sent to you for a specific buyer so that you can then text and call the buyer to say, guess what, something just came on, you have to leave work early, we have to see it right now. Right, that's cool, but to just set buyers up on those alerts, I think some of you are missing an opportunity to get more buyers more excited and into more properties that make sense for them if you're waiting for them to call you, right? You should write this down because this is an important piece of information as a real estate agent. It is not their job to call you. It is your job to call them. And that goes for lead generation. It goes for current clients. It goes for everything. It's not their job to call you. Even when it is their job to call you because you've given them something and they're supposed to follow up or they're supposed to give you feedback or whatever, even when it is their job to call you, when they don't, it's just your job to contact them again anyway, right? So remember that. It's something that was put in my head really early on, and I've just never forgotten that. It is not their job to call you. If you're ever sitting thinking, I wonder if I should make that phone call, the very fact that somebody came into your brain means stop what you're doing and make that phone call, because there's a reason they came into your brain. Hopefully it's not because they just listed with somebody else and you're about to see it on the MLS, right? Is this making sense? Yeah, so top 5 must-have list. Like, can we raise our right hand and say, I do solemnly swear to use a top 5 must-have list? It makes a massive difference. You will, I promise you, if you will use it and use it effectively and consistently, you will simply show people fewer homes, which means you'll sell more homes because you will spend less time shopping with more buyers. That's what happens. If you're looking for scale, if you're looking for growth, or if you're just trying to figure out, okay, well, when I have 3 or 4 buyers at one time, like maybe I don't have that issue today. However, I'm hopeful that as I continue to lead generate, I'm going to have that issue come up. How am I going to handle that? You consult them at a higher level. You set clearer expectations about how you're going to shop for properties. And then you hold everybody to those expectations by utilizing something like a top 5 must-have list. Right? For me, 2 or 3 times out, which means, you know, probably 6 or 8, maybe 9 homes that I've shown. My rule of thumb is you don't get to see more than 4 homes at a time. Right? You know why? Exactly. People can't keep them straight after a while. Like by the time you're on your 5th or 6th or 9th home, like they all blend together. Right? And so now they liked the one that had the really big yard with the pool, that had the 5 bedroom, like the extra 5th bedroom with the finished lower level. The problem with that house is that that was actually pieces of 4 different houses that they fused together in their mind, right? And so now all of a sudden they're creating homes that don't exist, and that makes the job even harder for them to find one they want to purchase and move forward on. So my rule of thumb was 3 or 4 houses at a shot. Again, today, you're really lucky if you have 4 properties that you can go and show all at one time, right? That are all still on the market and available. And again, in a more normalized market, important to know. And so after a couple of times out, if we haven't found a house that they're looking to purchase, one of my scripts when we got started, when I got started with buyers was, so Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I just wanted to let you know that on average, most of my clients find the house that they purchase within the first 8 to 12 houses we see. So I'm now setting an expectation, right? I'm setting a standard. People don't want to be like worse than average. And so I just set an expectation as to what that is.
Can you just say that again? How many?
8 to 10.
Okay.
Yep, 8 to 10. Most of my clients find the house they're looking for within the first 8 to 10 properties that we see. And it's just a simple little boop. We just plant that seed. Now I had some first-time home buyers overreact to that one time. By the time we got to the 12th house, they were so terrified I was going to stop showing them houses. Right? They were like non-communicative for the first 30 minutes of our showing time together, until I uncovered that was the issue. However, setting that standard as you begin with a new buyer, it just helps them. It helps them understand. But I remember my agent said to me when I moved to Ridgefield way back in 1997, I think I moved here, right? Is that when it was? Yeah, 1997. He said to me, hey, if we find a property today, first time out, right? If we find a property today that you think is the one, what are your thoughts on buying it? Now, he didn't know at the time who he was asking, because my answer to that was, if we find a property today, like first time out, and we don't have to waste more time shopping for houses, would I buy it? Uh-huh. I might even buy it before we walk in if it makes things go faster, right? For me personally, I'd rather look at things on my phone or on the computer, go and see 1 or 2 things and make a decision. Now that's not everybody. And yet it's a great question, because sometimes you need to remind people that they may find a house that they absolutely love that's perfect for them the first time we're out. And instead, what I find is that so many buyers, agents who work with buyers have this mentality of, it's not just a mindset, it's actually, they use it in script work sometimes. Don't worry, I'm here for you. We'll do this as long as it takes until you find the right one. Now that sentiment, I understand that sentiment. I'm not saying don't utilize that sentiment, but I think you have to be careful about the expectation you're setting with those words, right? There has to be a balancing act to all of this, which is why I like the 8 to 12 standard. Yes, Alex.
Sorry. So if you get a anything other than a yes, I'm prepared, does that tell you, or will that indicate that this is a shopper as opposed to a buyer? And could you address the difference between shopping and buying?
Yeah, so great question. And what I would do if someone said, oh, buy something today? No, my goodness, why on earth would I do that? I think I would, again, this might not come as a surprise at this point in our relationship, but I think I would ask another couple of questions, right? Because if someone reacted that way, I might say, oh, that's interesting. I'm curious, can you tell me about that? What would hold you back from buying today? And maybe they say, and I use this as an example because it happened to me once. I clearly didn't do a very good job of pre-qualifying these buyers. And when I asked that question and they answered in a negative, and I asked them to explore that a little bit more, they said, well, how could we possibly purchase? We have a lease that goes for another 9 months. Like, oh, okay. Well, again, clearly I didn't do a very good job of qualifying these buyers. But what was fascinating was we just got to have a different conversation. And I said to them, you know what? Wow, I am so sorry. I clearly missed that piece of information. Let's talk about that. If you found the right property and we could ask the owner of the property to help you get out of your lease, is that something you would explore now? Oh, now maybe the answer is no, we don't have a down payment. Right. And so then the next question is, got it. So where is that down payment coming from? Is that something you're going to save? Were you borrowing it anyway? I'm curious, if you were borrowing it anyway, might that be available to you earlier than someone was going to lend it to you 6 or 8 months from now? Right. Again, it depends on their answers, but you're still asking question. You're consulting them through what they see as an issue that I just saw as maybe a little speed bump. And so as we continued to dive into some of those questions, what I found was they had actually already spoken to their landlord because they really wanted to buy a house. So the landlord knew that they wanted to buy a house. And I said, well, would it be helpful if perhaps you and I went back to your landlord and brainstormed some ideas to make that possible for you? And they said, well, what do you mean? What kind of ideas? So, well, what if I asked your landlord if we could put your property on the market? I wouldn't charge a list side commission for it. They'll have to pay to get somebody in there when you leave anyway, so they're just paying it a little bit earlier. I won't charge a commission on my side. We'll find a replacement for you, and when that replacement is solid, we'll make sure that you have a house to move to, and we'll just orchestrate the whole thing. If we could replace you and they wouldn't lose any rent, do you think they might consider that?
Are we allowed to do that since we're not a broker? Give up our side of the commission?
So that's a great question, Don Doyle. Thank you so much for asking it. So you are empowered in our organization to make whatever decisions make the best sense for you and your business without punishment, repercussion, the third degree, 20 questions. Sometimes I might ask 2 or 3 questions to make sure that you're not giving things away that you don't need to give away, right? I'd rather ask you questions to help you protect your commission rather than So when I was at Century 21, I lived in a brokerage, like most brokerages out there, that have minimums, right? And the minimum in my Century 21 office was 5%. And when I was brand new, one of the ways I thought I could get more signs out was cutting my commission. So I was a 4.5er for my first year. And a really aggressive 4.5er, because I took a whole lot of listings in my first year, because I went in and I was undercutting the competition, and people were looking to save money, and I had a decent value proposition, and I was confident, so I got hired, right? And so I was always in trouble in my office. We didn't have I actually think that goes back to my elementary school days. I think I was always in trouble, period, right? But I digress. We can explore that at a later time, right? Watch for the movie version, and it'll show up there. But the idea of being in trouble didn't bother me, because I also didn't live in an office where I was penalized, right? And there are some offices, and Donna, I'm curious if your previous affiliation was like this, where if you took something less than 5, when the commission got paid, so if your side was then 2 instead of 2.5, right? The way the company dollar was calculated, they still got their piece as if it was 2.5, because that was their minimum, and so you just made less, right?
Never took less than 5, so I don't really know. But I know that if I wanted to, I'd have to go to my office manager and discuss it, but I never did.
And so, right, so you were always in trouble too. That's why we're all here, right? Because we're right. So the oh, you never took less than 5. Okay, I got it. I thought you meant you always did, and you were always in trouble. So I knew I liked you for a reason. But the idea of going to the manager, right? Because that's what we were supposed to do at Century 21 as well. And I would sit there and think to myself, okay, I'm sitting here supposedly as a real estate professional who, and at that time I was still in people's houses. I wasn't bringing people back to the office at that time. So I was sitting there having a conversation about me representing the sale of their largest asset. And because I wanted to take a commission that was less than what some arbitrary number was set at my office, I actually had to either not take it and get permission, or make a phone call and like call daddy for permission. I am so sorry that you will never ever have that as an issue in this organization as long as I am your broker, because to me that is horrifying. Why would you put someone in a position to look like they're not in charge of their business? And that's what those rules do. So let's be clear. In our world, you are empowered to make whatever decisions make sense for you in your business at that moment in time. If you feel like offering less and kind of getting it from here to use it over here because it's going to bring you 2 or 3 others over, you get to make all those decisions, and you get to make those decisions without a phone call, without a text, without anything. If you want to talk about it on the tail end to say, hey, here's what I did. I'm not sure it was the best path forward, but what would you have done to maybe make it different? I'm happy to always talk through how we can hold our commissions high. This is not a conversation that says go and undercut your commission at all costs or at any costs. But it's not a requirement, because I don't own your business. That's not partnership, what we're describing. Right? Partnership is I trust you, you trust me, we're in business together, and we learn together, we grow together, and we make mistakes together. That to me is what partnership is. Can you tell that's a bit of a soapbox for me? Whew, mamma mia, because I lived in that world, and I hated that world. I hated the constraints of that world. And I swore that would never be a world that I would inflict upon anybody else if I had the choice. Donna and then Ronnie, I think we had that. Those were the unmuted.
So then, like whatever our split is with Keller Williams, it still stays the same, or?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you pull in 2% on a listing, and that was what your deal was, and we're at a 70-30 split, well, guess what? You made less and we make less. Again, that's what partnership is about.
That's great.
We're not going to make the same and have you suffer even more than you already did. Because think about that. If you made a decision to reduce your commission for whatever valid business decision you made, you're already making less. In that world, then you're making even less than your less, because some greedy brokerage says, we won't accept any less. Again, it's just, that's not partnership in my world.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ronnie.
Okay, so my question is, if that's the case that you say, and we have a buyer that is hung up on the thing where if it's for sale by owner, that says 5% on the contract or something like that. Is that something that we could say is not the case, or is lower, or do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do know what you're saying. Yes, it's
Okay.
exactly the same conversation. You are in complete control over the
yeah,
commission.
but that's contract. So that's what I feel like that's your contract. So I don't want to say, don't worry about that, or let me cross that out, because you know what I'm saying? But you're saying that that we can.
I am saying that 100%.
Okay, wow.
I'm saying that if you are in a position that you believe the best decision in that
Okay.
moment for your business is to make an adjustment, again,
Okay.
I'm happy to teach you scripts and objection
Exactly, that would
handlers and
prevent
things.
that, and that you don't have those issues, but
Exactly.
let's say,
And-
like I said,
and
this would not
yet-
be a normal thing, but
I also live in the real world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not every moment in life is easily handleable or successfully handleable with an objection handler script, right?
okay,
And so there are times where it may make sense for you to offer less or offer to get paid less. You do not need to come back to me and ask permission for that. If you want to change that. Now, remember, if you choose to change it, and then, people ask me all the time, well, what
And it
if
gets
I make changes to that form, and then somebody cheats on me, can we like undo the changes and stick you after them? Nope, you've already made your bed. You don't have to lie in that, right? So if you choose to make a change, you can't then expect me to go and demand payment from somebody higher than what you already agreed to, right? So you have to live by your word as well once you make that outbound. But you're in control of that. We give you tools, i.e. the exclusive right to represent buyer document, written in such a way, because what we've learned over time is that if it's in writing and not a fill in the blank, most of the time people just accept the fact that that's what's standard, because that's what's typed in there, right? So that's why we don't have little fill in the blank lines. However, if you have a conversation, and if you're in a position, and if you choose for your business to move that number, you have that right. Donna Gilbert.
And the other reason, I love that about Keller Williams, because it is unique. Most brokerages don't handle it that way. So when you're in the middle of doing that negotiation and helping your either buyer or seller achieve, buyers in this instance, achieve, the best scenario, you don't have to consider how it's going to do that additional bump to your bottom line. It allows you to stay in that fiduciary position where you are taking their interests in first and primary.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Man, oh man, oh man. What else? Anything else on this topic?
Yes. But when you were referring to why we don't have blank lines in our exclusive right.
Mhm.
What is, and you were saying is 2.5% in the line, or
No.
what's in the line? That's the question.
3 and 5. 3 is the standard commission on the buy side. 5 if it's off the MLS, because 5 would be like a for sale by owner.
3 and 5. Got it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And again, we build them that way to give you a place to start. If it said 2.5 and someone wanted less, well, now you're starting at 2.5. So we build it at 3. Again, most of the time, most agents just have people sign to 3, because it goes on to say that if what's offered in the MLS is less, we can elect to just accept what's in the MLS. I did that all the time. I was more than happy, even though my contract said 3%. I was more than happy to take 2.5%. I was actually also happy to take 2.25%. Once we got down to 2% as the offer out on the MLS, then I would have conversations with buyers to say, like, for this particular house, before you see it, you need to know that you're going to have to make up the difference. And so this is what's being offered. You'll need to make up the difference at closing. Do you still want to see it? Right. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, about that, the idea of not just accepting, if you choose not just accepting what's offered out in the MLS. There are valid and effective ways to get paid on the buy side more than what's in the MLS, as long as you set that conversation up ahead of time. Again, we're going to get to that in the scripts shortly. Anything else on this topic?
I have a question.
Yes.
And maybe I'm kind of, because I'm, Keller Williams is the only agency I've been with. I'm just curious if, in fact, do other agencies, when let's say, I'm making the standard, let's say it's 2.5 for the listing agent, 2.5 for the buyer's agent. And do other people from other companies, when they're, let's say the buyer agent reduces it to a lower percentage, let's say they, they're supposed to get not supposed to, but they go with 2% instead of 2.5. And from Donna, what you were saying, like, let's say let's say, I'm just making this up again. Let's say it's a 50-50 split between the broker and the agent for, the commission. Do the other brokers give them the higher percentage? Is that clear or is that unclear? Like, do the other brokers say, no, it was, you might reduce your percentage, but we're not going to reduce ours?
There are many, yes, that will
Yes.
penalize you further. They'll take what they believe their minimum was supposed to be, as
Got
if
you.
you earned 2.5% or 3% or whatever.
I see.
Yes. Yeah. It's why that's what I was talking about before. It's like that double whammy.
And that's what I
You've
wasn't
already-
too sure. That's what I was
Yeah.
confirming.
You've already
right?
reduced it, and now
Understood.
in certain scenarios, it gets reduced again.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to move on. The questions that are at the bottom of we're back into the needs analysis, right? The questions at the bottom of that needs analysis page, I just want to kind of run through with you, right? Because as people start to describe what they're looking for, you need to be cognizant of the fact that with your aggressive listening skills, you're going to ask additional questions to get down to the root of why these things are important to them, so that they're really finding things that matter, that go on this top 5 must-have list. And part of the way you do that, right, I've already mentioned the 2 Qs, right, quantify and qualify. So you bring the 2 Qs back to this conversation, as well as arm yourself with lots of different questions, such as, can you describe what that looks like to you? If someone says, I'm looking for privacy. Great, can you describe that for me? Like, what does privacy look like? Does privacy mean that you want to be in the woods? Or does privacy mean that you want to be in like downtown with high fences? Right, both could provide privacy, but with 2 very different styles of property, right? So you need to continue to ask these questions. When someone says, I'm looking for a big yard. Excellent. Can you describe how big is big? Can you quantify that for me? Can you tell me why that's important to you? Why is a big yard important to you? Do you think a big yard is different for someone who's moving here from rural Idaho versus someone who's moving here from downtown LA? Right? Big yard, those are 2 very different things to those people, or at least could be very different things to those 2 people. So asking those questions, how big is big? How small is small? Instead of just hearing the words, hear the words and then ask those follow-up questions, right? I love number 3. Can you talk, why is that important? Why is that important to you? Why is that a necessary piece? Can you describe that for me? I one time had somebody say to me, I need flat property. Great, can you describe that for me? Can you tell me a little more about that? Well, we need flat land. Excellent, can you tell me why that's important to you? They said, well, I have 3 boys and my 3 boys are like soccer crazy, like scholarship bound to college soccer crazy. And so without flat land, they can't play soccer. Now, again, I practiced a lot in Ridgefield, right, the town that I live in and worked in a lot. It's called ridge field for a reason, right? And not a whole lot of flat land here. As a matter of fact, we have a saying here for those of you who practice here. It's called Ridgefield flat. Ridgefield flat is sloped, right? Most people would say, "Oh, it's sloped." You know, that's Ridgefield flat. And so having that conversation with her, it was really crazy important for her to have flat land. And so we had a conversation. Great. So you're moving to a place called Ridgefield for a reason. I'm curious. Look at that last three up from the bottom. So what happens if we cannot find that specific feature? I'm curious. How would that affect your ability to purchase? And we started to have a conversation. Well, are there properties maybe that are in walking distance or that abut parks or close to a school, right? So that after school or on the weekends, my kids could use that land. They bought a property that didn't have a whole lot of flat land, but they bought a property that was around the block from an elementary school. And so what they knew was if their kids kind of went through the side and went around the block a little bit, they had plenty of flat land. And so it became less of an important feature for the actual property. She could then focus on making sure that the house she found was a house that made sense for her family. And those boys still had flat land, even though she didn't own it. And we got to have that conversation to say, you know what, if this solution works for you, here are some benefits. You don't have to own it. You don't have to mow it. You don't have to pay taxes on it, right? You get to have the flat land for the boys to play soccer and not have to worry about all those other things that you would if you actually owned it. So really important to dig a little bit and understand what people are looking for, right? I had another lady who said to me, I love to garden, so I need flat land to garden. So let's talk about that. Again, knowing that we don't have a ton of that here, I'm curious, are there ways that you could consider gardening with perhaps less flat land? You could be like one of those terrace farmers, right? On the side of a mountain. And you know what she bought? She bought a house that had a pool, so all the flat land was taken up by the pool. And her gardening was terraced because the pool was kind of built into the hill that was the backyard. And so her gardening became terraced above the pool and all around the pool. So it wasn't the flat land she didn't need for the gardening. We just talked that through. But without asking additional questions or understanding why flat land is important, instead a lot of us just write down, okay, flat land, and then you bang your head against the wall trying to find flat land for somebody in an area where flat land might not be easy. You see why this is so important to keep asking those questions? Look at some of these other questions. What exactly do you mean by X? Right? Don't be afraid to keep digging. What does having a large kitchen or what does a big yard actually accomplish for you? Tell me some more about that. I really do love that next question. What happens if we cannot find that specific feature? Right? That's a really great sacrifice question. Because again, you're helping them understand that sometimes success means some sacrifice. And so if you ask that question and they say, well, then we wouldn't buy it without that. Well, it sounds like that might be one of those properties that belongs on your top 5 must-have list, right? If you cannot live without that feature, if the answer to the question is what would happen if we couldn't find it, well, then we wouldn't buy the house. Okay, well, that's probably one that goes on the top 5 must-have list. Versus something like, well, you know what, it'd be a bummer, but we could live without it. Okay, right? Nobody ever went to the emergency room for bummer. So we can work with that, right? Now, I hope you heard what I just said. No one ever went to the emergency room for bummer, which means it's not always about finding every single thing that they want, because as we started this conversation, that is impossible. You are setting an impossible standard. And if that's how you're communicating with your buyers, you're assisting them in setting impossible standards for themselves.
That was my next question. Do you ever assist them? Do you ever assist them in their must-haves, meaning like, I'm just giving you, for instance, somebody says they want a, white kitchen, and let's say majority of things on the market that they look at is, sometimes they want something that's a new trend, let's say, do you try to say, like, do you try to focus on what the must-have should be, more of a general than a specific item, or do you just let them give their must-haves, and then when you're not finding it, go back to the drawing board and ask the question,
Well-
what happens if we can't find it?
Well, I think that, yeah, you let them determine their own top 5 must-have list.
Cool.
And I think I would be a little cautious about what? I would be a little cautious about the top 5 must-haves being so specific,
Right.
right? Updated kitchen is different than updated kitchen with gray countertops and white cabinetry, right? So I'm curious, knowing that that is a very specific ask, how does that fit in with the time frame you stated earlier that you'd like to find a house in the next 30 days or be in before school, right? I'm curious, knowing how specific your kitchen needs are, I'm wondering if we should lower the price point a bit, which would allow you the funds to then redo any kitchen for a house that you purchased exactly the way you wanted it. Is that something we should be talking about or considering? Right, so you can have some of those balancing act conversations.
Great.
Right, Donna.
Sorry. And the other thing about that top 5 list, and remember, it's a top 5 list of their must-have. So it's getting down smaller and smaller, honing in and in order. And so if it is something like I need an updated kitchen and it has to be white with this specific granite, blah, 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 blah. So you offer solutions on that, because finding that's going to be like a needle in the haystack, perhaps. So solutions like, what if we did that afterwards? What if we took out a loan that allowed you the money that you needed to put that in afterwards? You you help them work through, we help them work through the options, knowing that just going out and finding a perfect house it's not happening for anybody at any price point, even if you build it yourself. Just know that as a fact. So we have to deal with all the other solutions that surround that. They may not understand in their mind. So to help them walk through that is really critically important.
Yeah, love that. And so what I hope you're hearing from these conversations is it's not always just about what they want, right? There's no consultative skill involved in just listening to what buyers are looking for. The consultative skill comes into play when you listen to what they're looking for and then ask them additional questions and then help them either problem solve or troubleshoot if some of the things that they're latching onto may not show up, right? I had a gentleman once time who was moving here from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and apparently in Dallas-Fort Worth everybody has 4-car garages, right, and no basements, because he kept coming. Like, we would see some houses and he's like, I don't understand, like, where do you put all your cars? Like, there's a 2-car attached garage kind of right there. Is that what you mean? Well, yeah, there's for 2 cars. Where do you put the other cars? Well, we put them in the driveway, right? Or, right, so when you start having that come up over and over again, he was actually fun because his kids were so not used to basements that every time we'd walk into a house, his 2 kids would run to the basements and run around the basement. They were like, look, the house is above us. They were so fascinated by the fact that there was a basement and the whole house and the people were above them. So the idea of basements was new for them, but they were looking for something that locally we just don't have. And so we got to a point, as Donna said, of having that conversation of what if what would it make sense for you if we focused on a property with as many garages as is customary here, typically 2, in that $500,000 to $600,000 price range, which he was in? And would it make sense if you have a need for additional, would it make sense for you to perhaps have a detached garage built after the fact, right? We could look at what that might cost. We could maybe reduce the price of the house you're looking for. Again, so we're back to those same conversations. Or taking out a loan with additional funds to be able to buy that afterwards. Or finding like a company that does more like, what are those called? What are those pre-done houses called?
Modular.
Thank you, modular, right? What if we found a company that did a modular 2-car detached garage that could pop one on your whatever, right? Yes, Donna.
And you know what happens, I love this because it is so consultative. And what happens is you start to teach them how to behave and how to think.
Yeah.
Start to model that behavior for them, and they start to, and at first they could push a little bit, but you have to continue through, and then they'll start offering solutions. Well, could we do this? Do you know somebody who could? And it starts to all roll like a partnership, and that's how they end up with the house that's perfect, because they'll have to do some of the work to it.
Well, let me give you, do you all know Gary's definition of leadership? Right, so Gary's definition of leadership is teaching people how to think so they can have what they want when they want it. And that's basically what Donna just said, right? So from a leadership perspective, you are leading people forward, teaching them how to behave, teaching them how to think so that they can have what they want when they want it, right? I love that definition of leadership. So that's how the needs analysis is built. It's you asking question after question after question to help them continue the conversation around what's important to them and understanding why it's important to them. Asking questions like, so I'm curious, Donna, should that be on our top 5 must-have list? And then they say yes or no, right? And we're that top 5 must-have list, you're writing things in, you're crossing them out, you're moving them around, so that they end up with something that they can work from, right? So you get through that whole consultative process and you get to say, okay, I think we're done. Here it is. What do you think? And if they think it makes sense, you put it down in front of them and say, great, let's sign this so that we're all committing to finding this property. And now let's just go and find it. Guys, if you'll work with that kind of consultative power at the needs analysis, bringing a top 5 must-have list that is that specific, you won't need more than 8 or 12 houses before they find the property they want to purchase. You won't. And I know there are some of you who hear that and say he is just making that up. He is so completely full of it. I can tell you, I'm not. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it, right? And I wouldn't say it if I haven't used the technique myself to help people find what they're looking for faster. It works. It works. So the next couple of pages in your handout there, the anatomy of a buyer transaction, of the mastering the buyer consultation, is about 7 jillion other questions, right? So you can kind of go through and see, wow, there are lifestyle questions, location questions, house questions, bedroom questions, kitchen questions, right? So you can look and see all of those questions so that you're prepared for those questions. Now, step number 3 and step number 4, share your value proposition and educate your buyers. The reason I asked you to kind of read through that last night is because we're going to skip those in our time together. And it's not because they're not important. However, I have found that these particular items, sharing your value proposition and educating your buyers about process, usually, they're not necessarily necessary for every single buyer. And for the ones that they are necessary for, you oftentimes can find other places to kind of have some of these conversations. I've had some of these conversations in the car, in between houses. I've had some of these conversations when we finish a house and something kind of comes up. Well, what was that weird pipe with the fan in the basement with that little weird blue measuring thing? Like, great question. So I'm curious, how much do you know about radon? Radon, what's that? Oh, well, it's the gas that comes from the natural decay of uranium in the ground that can poison you. No, that's not the script. I'm kidding. So the idea of having then a radon conversation because they've asked about it. How much do you know? Well, not very much. So radon is a naturally occurring gas. It shows up a lot in Fairfield County and in other parts of Connecticut, mostly because we're built on a lot of ledge here, right? And that system is put in place to vent some of the radon gas from below the foundation to above your roof line. So it kind of just bypasses accumulating in the house. Oh, okay. Well, can you tell me more about that? Or can you, is it this? Is it that? What happens if they ask you, hey, well, is radon dangerous? What's the question? What's the answer to that question?
If it's above a certain level, I forget exactly what, I don't have a point. It's a certain measurement. Above that, it has been known to cause lung cancer is what but.
Are you sure?
Am I sure?
Can you show me proof? So I'm putting you in this position, Ronnie, for
No,
a
I
reason,
understand.
right? And the reason I'm doing it is because you don't want to get into a health conversation
Right.
about radon, right? So the answer to the question is radon dangerous? Is great question.
Okay.
There are lots of people who think so and lots of people who think not.
Yeah.
And so what I would encourage you to do is go ahead and Google that. What I can tell you is you're going to find a whole lot of pros and a whole lot of cons. What I would encourage you to do, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is look at radon from a business perspective. And what I mean by that is if you go ahead and have your inspection and the radon tests come back with numbers that that seem to indicate mitigation is necessary, go ahead and have that mitigated. Because whether it's a health concern or not a health concern, right? Whether if you don't address it, eventually you'll be a seller. And so as a seller, your buyer may come back and ask you to address it when you go to sell the property. So my encouragement would be, regardless of whether it's a health concern or not, again, because there are some people who think it is and others who think it's the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on the real estate community. And that's true, guys. I'm not making that up. If you Google that, you'll find people who think that if you walk past a house in the street that has a radon level over 4.0, that somehow or other the end of your life is near. And there are others who believe that, again, it's a naturally occurring gas, and open your basement windows every once in a while, you'll be just fine. Here's what I can tell you. When you live here, radon is just one of those things. So it's not like you're going to escape it. And we all live here very peacefully, right? So be careful that you don't make radon into a big thing so that the buyers don't make it into a big thing. That doesn't mean lie or ignore it. Answer the questions that come up. Just answer them from the perspective of, here's how we're going to handle that. We're going to handle that conversation with a business mind on. Here's why the business end of radon says, have it mitigated. Either negotiate it with the seller up front, or if you really want the house and that's something you don't want to bring up, then let's just go ahead and mitigate it yourself. It's a $1,200 issue, right? We're not talking about the end of the planet. So my point in educating your buyers and your value proposition is that a lot of this can be peppered into conversation while you're working with these buyers. And the reason that for me, I skip over all this as part of the actual consultation is because it makes it really long, right? And your buyers start to get antsy after a while. And so what I would rather us focus on is be clear, set the stage up front, do a really powerful needs analysis, and then move right to having a conversation about being hired, right? The hiring conversation, which is step number 6 in your, and the next page in your packet here, and close for the agreement. Make sense? Now, it is 5:01. So we're going to take a little vote. What do you want to do? We can go through closing for the agreement. Let me just see if you have, I don't think you have a copy of the buyer agreement. We can go through that script, or we can jump right over to the anatomy of a buyer transaction right now and get through that. And what I'll promise you is 1 o'clock on Monday is forms, right? We talked about that. We're going to go through the 3 different forms, the offer to purchase, the purchase agreement, and the whatever. That's going to take the hour. However, I am happy to do an hour and a half on Monday, and from 2 to 2:30, review with you this step and hold it side by side with our buyer contract so that you can see how the script kind of overlays the actual buyer agreement and ask any questions about how that process works. Does that sound like a plan? Okay, I see a lot of head nodding. So because I see most of the heads nodding, I'm going to do exactly that, right? So 1 o'clock for the forms. If the forms is not something you need, join us at 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, I'll spend a half hour and we'll do step 6, which is go through that part of the buyer consult with the actual buyer form so that you can see how those two work together. And what we'll do for the next 45 minutes is we will dive into the anatomy of a buyer transaction. Again, that is in that Google Drive. If you haven't printed that out and reviewed it, you can go ahead and do that now or bring that up on your computer. So,
Rick?
Yes.
Before you move on, if you don't mind, the pages with all the questions, the lifestyle, location, is that something that you would consider giving to the client beforehand, before meeting, and let them fill in some of those answers?
So great question. I personally wouldn't, because that is not given as let's get an answer to every single one of those questions. That's not why you have it. You have it to read the questions, so the questions are in your mind. So if someone's really heavy on kitchen, well, you have a resource that says, okay, well, these are some of the kitchen questions that may come up, so I can ask and dig a little deeper on those. If someone's heavy on land or exterior or style of home, right? So that's why we give those to you, just to kind of get your mind thinking in a question way. I think if you gave these to a buyer and asked them for an answer to each of them, they may run out the back door on you. Right, because now it gets to be like a lot. So I think I would rather have a powerful one-on-one conversation and bring these in as needed instead of utilize them as a foundation. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Vic, I have one other question. I'm just
Yes.
curious. Is there, I don't know why I don't see you, but okay. Is there any difference how you would be working with a buyer that is, physically here versus working with someone that's not located here, but looking in here, like, or would it be the same procedures, or do you see any differences? Obviously their needs and, and their wants would be discussed, but I'm just curious, even from a standpoint of like, if they're
So
doing
do you
a
mean someone
virtual-
relocating from across the country? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, if they're in another state and they want you to be looking for a home for them and, doing some Facebook things or lives or, coming, not physically here all the time.
Yeah, so the
I'm just
only
saying,
change I would make,
physically in any way or no?
the only change I would make is sometimes you may have to kind of be the showing for some of those people. If someone's in California, right, you may have to go and be in the house and kind of be walking them around on FaceTime,
at
that kind of thing, do some more virtual showings.
Mhm.
And I personally think that if you're doing that, I would just make sure that the listing agent knows about it ahead of time. Because there are some people who get weirded out that you're walking around their house, you know, with
Of course.
broadcasting
No, I
their
wouldn't.
property. So if that's what you're doing, I just think it's a courtesy to let the listing agent know. So if the seller has any questions about it, you know, we went ahead and told the listing agent that we're going to be doing that virtual showing with the phone and, but I think other than that, there's not really any difference.
Okay.
All right, so the anatomy of a buyer transaction. We're gonna skip the first couple because we've talked about lead generation, right, ad nauseum in the beginning. You're gonna get that appointment, you're gonna consult them, you're going to have the client speak with a financing person, right, to determine their ability, because as we said, able, ready, and willing is really the kind of buyer you're looking for. You're going to show them properties and continue to consult them until that one shows up. And then once the one shows up, you're going to immediately talk them through about, okay, let's go back to the office and sit down and let's do some homework on it. Right, you're going to produce market conditions and comparable data, just like you would on the listing side, to help the client make an informed decision about an offer. Now, number 7 is important to remember because what is the number one question that buyers ask when they're ready to make an offer on a house?
What do you think of the price?
Exactly right. They want to know, you know, what would you offer? What should we put down? And so if you're not doing step number 7 and producing market conditions data and the best 3 sold comparables for them, it's no wonder they're asking because they don't have a point of reference. If you also haven't been working with them with specific statistics on a town-wide level, so perhaps they're shopping in a specific town, do you know and have you been sharing with them what the list to sale price ratio has been for the last 30 or 60 days? You know, do they know? One of the strategies I like when working with buyers is when they see property and pass on those properties, keep them informed about how quickly those properties are selling. Hey, you know, I just wanted to let you know those 3 that we saw on Saturday morning. I know it's Monday afternoon, but guess what? All 3 of them under agreement, right? If you can help them see the pace of the market, it helps them understand what they're going to be called upon to do. If you're not telling them any of that, when it comes time for them to step up, it then starts to feel like you're a little commission breathy, right? When you say things only at that moment in time, well, you're going to have to offer asking price or better. Oh my goodness, really? Who's doing that? Well, everybody. Well, you haven't said a word about that until like just now when I'm ready to write the offer. Do you see how that comes across? Do you see how that feels a little bit like an ambush? Right? So again, setting proper expectations up front and having those conversations. If it were me, month supply of inventory, list to sale ratio, days on market, right? Buyers would be getting a weekly update in the towns they were looking at to keep them really plugged in. So then again, when it's their time to step up and they know what they have to do to win. By the way, in a market like today, I would also, after I was hired, sit and have a conversation around exactly what they can expect. Don't push these poor people out into an arena that they think is anything different than what it really is, because that's just not fair, right? And again, let me ask this question. Why do most of us not do that? Get really, really specific and really clear right up front before the first house is even shown about what it's going to take to be a winner, what some strategies are that we could use when writing the offer, what numbers we're going to have to look at before making any decisions about moving forward. Why are those not had? There's one very specific reason.
Afraid you're afraid you're gonna get them, worried, I guess. That's what I
Well,
would assume.
yes, and it's fear, and it's specific fear about buyers deciding not to buy,
Mhm.
right? But I want you to remember, the job isn't to sell somebody a house. The job, once you're hired, is to interpret current conditions so that the buyer can make the best decision possible. And if the best decision for them at that moment in time is not to be a buyer because they're not interested in multiple offers, they're not interested in playing in the arena that they have to play in at that moment in time, I think I'd rather know that right up front rather than wasting everybody's time. Right? That becomes a lead generation conversation, not a buyer consult conversation. If you're afraid to have those conversations because you're afraid people won't be your buyers at that moment in time, well, that means you don't have a big enough pipeline of buyers that you're fearful that your business is going to dry up, right? Here's the other issue with that. All that is about you, and it's not about the buyer, right? So be careful about that. Number 8, write up the offer with the client. Make sure the offer is complete. It's going to include some kind of a cover letter, an offer to purchase, a copy of whatever binder check they're writing, right? Nowadays, that check is written directly to the buyer's attorney. So what does that mean? You need to know who the buyer's attorney is ahead of time. You need to be having that conversation with your buyers. If you're suggesting a buyer, give that to them after the first day you go out.
Suggesting an attorney.
Yeah, by the way, we're going to need an attorney, and there's no time to shop for one once you find the house. So now that you've hired me, here's my suggestion for an attorney. Go ahead and give them a call and introduce yourself. Just let them know that we've started working together and that you should be contacting them shortly with a property that they want to move forward on. Yes, Donna.
Would you just give them one name, or do you have to give them the 3-name thing?
That's a great question. Let me address that one.
Please.
Why are people taught to give 3 names?
Liability.
Exactly right. Let me ask this question. Do you really think that if you give 3 names and they choose one of those names that you gave them, and something goes sideways and they're litigious people, do you think that you're not going to get sued? The whole give 3 names thing, forgive whoever invented it, is the stupidest thing I think I have ever heard. My encouragement to you is spend time vetting a really good team of people and then stand confidently behind that team of people.
You have made my night. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm sick of giving 3 names.
Yeah,
I only want them to use one.
Of course. It's so goofy, right? I mean, one of the things that I hope you have learned in our time together is that at the risk of being unpopular or whatever, I'm happy to stand apart with common thoughts or processes that just don't make sense. And that is definitely one of them, right? Now, principals and practice instructors, CE instructors, that's all well and fine. Let them do and teach whatever they want to do and teach. As your broker, I'm telling you, I don't see any real liability to you that exists if you give 1, 3, or 97 different names. It's all the same, because if they want to blame you, it all came from you anyway. So instead, give them one person that you know is not going to cause any trouble because you know them and have vetted them, right? I will tell you that by the time I was stepping out of the buyer world, I was very, very rigid about who some of my buyers, who my buyers would use, to the point that, it was probably a little ridiculous. Like, okay, so again, if you want to use Uncle Jim as your inspector, please note, I don't know Uncle Jim. The rest of my team doesn't know Uncle Jim. We don't know if Uncle Jim is ASHI certified. I don't know how to reach Uncle Jim at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night if we have something blowing up and going wrong with your transaction. Understand the reason I've asked you to utilize these people is because I've spent time, effort, energy, and money vetting them. They have proven themselves as valued partners that I trust, and therefore you can trust to make sure we get across the finish line. Debbie.
It's super important today that it's somebody that you can talk to and that who is willing to talk to you. And there are more attorneys who are pains in the neck about that than cooperative. And so I think it's critical.
I second that emotion
I love
with
it.
firsthand knowledge. I got fired, but I should have fired my attorney.
Yeah, that's right. Right. So, and if you're newer to the industry, right, and you don't have a lot of experience, that's why you belong to a larger organization, right? It's why you have 600 other real estate agents in your organization that you can ask questions of. You know what? Who have you used? Who have you vetted? Can I start using that person? Right. And until or unless you have the experience to know that, well, I'm not going to use that person anymore because now I found this person, I like this person, right? You'll find your own way. You'll build your own relationships. Until then, utilize the relationships that your colleagues have spent time building, because I'll tell you what, we've had the last 12 months, we've had attorney issues, and it's because people don't think it's important to really choose the right attorney. And it is crazy important. And that goes for inspectors and insurance people and everybody right down the line. Yes, Donna Gilbert.
Yeah, and building a relationship with attorneys or any of your allied resources is critically important. I have a team in the different segments of Fairfield County that I work in. And I tell clients, listen, this is my A team, go discuss whatever you need. If you choose someone else, this is actually part of my script. If you choose someone else, I cannot be held responsible for the outcome. With these people, I know that I'm sending you to a trusted resource and they're accountable to you. They're also accountable to me. And I've said that because I have a relationship with them. I know how they work. I know how they feel about real estate agents. And frankly, that's important. We are partners. And when I'm talking to attorneys in particular, I use that kind of language to see how they respond because it's a partnership.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I love that script Donna used. Right. One of the things I can add to it is, I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, do you trust me? And they say, well, yes, absolutely. Well, I want you to understand that I trust them as much as you trust me. And if you trust me enough to make sure that the people we're bringing to the table are going to work on your behalf, not on their behalf, that's the team. That's the team to use, right? So again, you get the point. Number 9, present your offer to the listing agent and or to the listing agent and in some scenarios to the sellers if you're granted permission. That doesn't happen very often, and yet if for some reason you were going to present directly to the sellers, you'd have to get the permission of the listing agent. If geography permits, deliver the offer to the listing agent in person if at all possible. If not, scan and email all the documents to the listing agent and then call and or text them to say, I just sent you an offer, please confirm receipt. Please confirm receipt. Write that in big letters on this piece of paper. Because if you don't ask them to confirm receipt and a couple of days go by and you haven't heard anything, it's not their fault, it's yours. Right? You got to follow that up. This is what I sent. Hey, have you reviewed it? Hey, are there any questions? Number 10, ask the listing agent when you might expect to hear back from them. That's another really important point. Don't just send it, have them confirm, and then just wait around for an answer. Remember, you're advocating on behalf of a buyer. Your buyers need and want information. That's just how buyers behave. They need and want information. You need to have as much information as often for them as possible. So I'm going to send that to Debbie. I'm going to ask her, hey, Debbie, when can we expect to hear back? And Debbie will say, you know what, I will get this to them as soon as possible. I know they're both home from work around 6:30. And so I assume I can be back to you by 7. That's great. I'm curious, if I don't hear from you by 7, can I give you a call? Right? I just want to set expectations that we want to hear back from you. Right? Number 11, monitor the response from the sellers. Do not assume that since you've not heard back that there is no answer. If you've not heard back from the listing agent within the expected time frame, now again, in a fast-moving market, the next phrase is almost sounds ridiculous, right? Or at the very longest, 24 hours. In a market moving this quickly, 24 hours, they've already accepted an offer, the inspections are done, they've signed the contracts, and they're starting to count the money, right? That's what happens in 24 hours in a market that moves this quickly. Make a call, right? Don't be afraid to be a pest. You can be a professional pest, and if you say things like, "Hey, Debbie, I know I am like the biggest pest for you, and I am so sorry about it. I have really anxious buyers, and I'm curious when we might have, I might have an answer." I'm just going to call it out. She thinks I'm a pest anyway, so I'll just say, I am so sorry to be a thorn in your side. I am so sorry to be a pest. I certainly don't mean to be that guy. And yet, here's my question. There are ways to be a really, really aggressive pest and not come across aggressive or pesty. You got to get better at that. Right? If I call Debbie and say, look, you told me 7 o'clock. It's 7:03. Like, what games are you playing? What's going on here? Right? Now you're putting Debbie on the defensive, right? You have to build partnerships and build relationships in such a way that you can earn that pest and not have it become a problem. Go ahead, Deb.
The conversation is not a chit chat social hour. It's specific to your transaction. And you may have said this, but even before submitting the offer, I am advising every buyer agent to have a conversation with the listing agent and find out what the desired terms are, if you can, for the seller, because that helps you structure an offer that's going to be more attractive. But keep it to a point, and you can couch it with, oh my gosh, I'm sure you're getting a zillion calls, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. And yet, tell me what's going to be a win for your seller, and then let them talk.
Great script. Great script. The end of number 11 says that your buyers are anxious. The way you quell their anxiety is by being over communicative, right? And even if that means if I've called Debbie a couple of times and I still don't have anything back, I get to call the buyers and say, hey, you know what? I am following up. We don't have any word yet. Hang in there. I'm working as hard as I can to get you to get you an update. Here's what you don't do. You don't call the buyers and say, I have called this woman 35 different times, and I think she clearly something's going on because she's not responding to me. Right? And here's why people do that. People do that because when they're uncertain about how to have a conversation without information with their own client, they vilify other people. They think that puts them on the same side of the table as the client. So now we can both be mad at Debbie together. Understand that starts to plant a seed in the buyer's head that something unfair or untoward is going on the list side, and it erodes trust. If we're eroding trust in the sellers and in the listing agent, what chance do we have of putting a strong transaction together if people think everyone's screwing around? So be really careful about how you speak about everybody else in the transaction. You're sabotaging the buyer's ability to think clearly and move forward if you start to vilify the sellers or the listing agent. Please don't do that. I hear it a lot, and it's a really big mistake. Number 12, when a response comes through, take the information down and then communicate the information back to the client objectively. not the place for an editorial. What do I mean by that? So Debbie calls me back and says, so there are a couple of other offers on the table, and your full price offer was really appreciated. Your number of 450 is being countered at 475. And I asked Debbie, okay, is everyone being countered at 475 or just us? At present, just you. If you'll pay the 475, great. Don't make the mistake of going back to the buyer and saying, well, you're not going to believe this. Can you imagine the greed of these people? We gave them a full price offer and now they're asking for even more. And you laugh when I say it, but guys, it's going on daily where there's this conversation because you're uncomfortable delivering what isn't exciting, you got the house news, because they may have to work a little bit more. There may be some additional steps to winning this property because you're uncomfortable having that conversation. Again, you turn and vilify somebody else. Please remember, not the place for an editorial. Instead, you get to go back and say, great news, we did hear back from the listing agent. The sellers are happy to sell you the property. They're just looking for a little bit more from you on it. And that little bit more is going to be an extra $25,000. If you will say yes to the extra $25,000 at 475 under these terms, they are willing to say yes to you. And oh, by the way, if what I said earlier is actually the truth, they're not asking anyone else to counter. They've singled you out. They would like you to buy the property. They're just going to look for this number instead. I'm curious, what would you like to do? Remember, they have ARM. They have accept, reject, modify. And so you remind them of that each and every time. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, the good news is that you're in control here. That's a really important script, by the way, especially in today's market. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're in control here. You get to say yes, no, or modify and go back with a different number. Would you like to talk about the pros and cons of each of those? Why is it important to remind them that they're in control, especially in a market like today? That's correct. I could see you were all thinking it. They want, you have to remind them that they're in control, because if they feel like they're completely out of control, they don't feel good about moving forward. You have to remind them. Buyer's market, seller's market, transitional market, they're in control because they're powered with ARM, ARM. They get to accept, they get to reject, they get to modify. Let me ask you this question. Who has more power and control in a negotiation, a buyer or a seller? And I'm going to give you a small hint. It has nothing to do with the market. Who do you think?
Buyer?
Buyer. Who else? Seller? Maybe? Here's my answer to that. Whoever I represent. The one who has the most control and the most power is the one that I represent, because I'm always going to tell my client, regardless of who they are, buyer or seller, that they have the power because they have ARM. I'm always, from every single round of negotiation, I remind them, don't forget, you get to control this transaction because you can accept, reject, or modify. And so it's irrelevant who might actually have the real power, because with my clients, I make sure that they believe that they are in control by making sure that they know that they can say yes, no, or something different. It's an important concept. Now, sometimes in a market moving this quickly for buyers, the answer might be you are in control of saying yes to that 475 counter or no. You get, because the modify, if you go back and say we'll pay 455 or 460, they're just going to move on to the next person. But you get to make that decision. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. You're not forced to say yes to 475. Unless that is the house that you want to make sure that you're living in 35 days from now. If that's the case, then I encourage, with full control, you saying accept. Right? You see what I'm doing here? All right. And remember, counsel your clients, understanding that their goal is to be in the house that they said they wanted to buy, especially with things moving so quickly. Your idea that they're overpaying, not relevant. Because you don't get to spend their money. Now, what you do get to do is consult. So at 475, let's talk about pros and cons. The pro is that you get to live in that house. The con is that if you need to become a seller in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, you may be buying at the top of the market. And so they may not be a ton of appreciation in the short term. So when you become a seller, you may be on par. You may be less than where you purchased. Right? Those are all realities of any market. However, when you may be buying at the top, that may show up for you if you need to be a seller in the short term. Knowing that, I'm curious, is that still the house you want to buy? And what a lot of agents do is that, someone comes back and says, well, the counter is 475 and there's drama. Oh my goodness. Well, I couldn't let you pay that. Well, with all due respect, who are you? Right? You're not loaning them the $25,000. If you are, then you have a right to contribute to that conversation. If you're not loaning them the $25,000, then it's not up to you to have that conversation. You need to advise properly, knowing what the pros and cons could be, what the market may or may not deliver for them, and then support their decisions. You don't go back to them and say, okay, well, they want 475, but I want you to know right now, it's never going to appraise. Again, I'm just repeating the things that I hear. I know it sounds silly when I say them, but it sounds a whole lot less silly, but just as real when agents are using it in the field every day. So make sure that you're consulting them from the perspective of they said they want to live in that house, right? Present the information back to the listing agent, ask again when you can expect a response, continue the process until you have agreement, and then you'll rewrite the offer on a new clean document and send it signed to the listing agent ASAP. Expect to receive the revised offer back from the listing agent with the seller's signature. Now, 24 hours, I'd love to have that be 2 hours. And yet there are some times where it's an overnight. There are some times where, the last house I bought, I used the address for the seller that was listed in the MLS on the tax records, and the address was wrong. So they wouldn't sign the contract because I had the wrong address. So that happened to be an overnight. And so I had to rewrite it in the morning and then resend it. And then she was out showing property, so it was like, it took 24 hours for me to get the signed contract back. Nothing else was going on. I still moved forward with the property, and yet it did take 24 hours. We'd love that to be as short a period of time as possible, right? Expect and then check that the listing that you have an accepted offer on is reported in the MLS as under contract. Minimally under contract, continue to show. That has to be done within 24 hours. This says 48. If you remember, these forms are a little dated from an MLS change that happened last year. 24 hours. Why is it important that you have the listing agent report that property is under agreement? Yes, Ron.
Oh, so so other people who are looking at the MLS for the clients realize, what the scenario is? Or that's
Yeah, it's a safety mechanism, right? If it says under contract, well, then somebody knows that you've accepted an offer. If it says under contract, continue to show, a lot of agents don't go and continue to show it, right? Because they know that someone has accepted the offer. So it's important to get that status done quickly and correctly. And it's 24 hours. And so again, if now Debbie hasn't reported that in 24 hours, I had to make a phone call to say, hey, Deb, it's Rick Scott. I hate to be a bugaboo on this, but I just have really anxious buyers and they're anxious to make sure that the property is reported correctly. So could we please get that property listed as under contract as quickly as possible, like this afternoon? Is there anything I can do to help to get that, to have that get taken care of? That's one of my favorite scripts. When I'm asking someone to do something and being a pain, is there anything that I can do to help to get that taken care of? Right, because I'm willing to go and do whatever it is you need me to do. Now, the reality is in that scenario, there's not much I can do. And yet I'm still going to offer the assistance. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Under contract, continue to show. How, like, does that mean if it says that for what seems like forever on some homes, is that the fact because it's not finalized? I mean, it's not, they're still like making changes or going back and forth, or why would a agent keep that on there for a very long time? The afraid it's going to fall through, or it's not finalized is what you're saying?
Yeah, so the answer to the question is really hard to tell.
Okay.
It could just be laziness on behalf of the agent not stepping it through the process. It could be that the seller wants to continue to show the property. That's less likely, right? Because most sellers are like, okay, we have an accepted offer, let's not be doing this anymore, right? And yet it could be that they still want to continue to show the property. And
That would come from the seller.
I'm sorry?
That would, I'm just thinking of a scenario, but that would come from the seller because there is.
Correct.
Okay.
Whether they want to show the property always comes to, all direction comes from the seller.
Okay.
Right, in those scenarios. And the other answer to your question is that there are a lot of agents who just simply don't understand the difference between under contract, continue to show, and under contract. They mean two different things. It's driven by the seller as to whether or not they want to continue to show the property or not. It has nothing to do with, is there a non-contingent contract or any of that? So there are a lot of people who translated old meanings for old codes into these new codes.
Okay.
And that's just not what they mean anymore.
Okay, that's
So,
what I want to make sure I
yeah.
understand.
Once revised, the fully executed offer form comes back to you, prepare the paperwork and deliver that to the buyer's attorney, right? And again, you're writing those 1% checks directly to that buyer's attorney and delivering that to them. Another copy of all the paperwork gets delivered through command to your MCA, again, within 3 days of the offer coming together. It is not acceptable to wait until inspections are done to give the MCA paperwork and the binder check. Some people are superstitious that if they turn in the paperwork before the inspection, somehow that's a bad omen. If that is you, I am sorry to say that my best advice to you is get over it. because you have to get paperwork into the market center within 3 business days, right? Again, people start calling us, and if we don't have the documentation, everybody starts to look foolish and information can't flow as freely. So make sure that you're within that 3-day deal. Number 22, create and submit a commission. They're now called commissions in command, not green sheets anymore, right? So you submit a commission to the MCA on the new transaction. That happens at the same time as you're putting in the transaction and pushing the paperwork through. You then create a commission, right? That all gets pulled through on our back end, and then we have everything we need to assist you. Be prepared. That means having the following information ready for the listing agent. Who is the buyer's attorney? As I said before, that needs to happen early. Who is going to be the home inspector? Who is going to be the septic inspector? You need to have those things all set up. I'll tell you, in today's market, I always have an inspection set up before I submit the offer. I call my inspector and said, I'm submitting an offer. I expect to have, I expect, this is a mindset shift for some of you. I expect an acceptance within the next 24 hours. So therefore, I'd like to set up an appointment for an inspection on Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning. Which do you have available? That way, when I go and submit my offer, I can say to the listing agent, all I need is a yes from the seller. We already have the inspection set up and confirmed. If you don't have an inspector who will work with you on that, find an inspector who will. Because that's an important part of winning the day today. Sellers don't want to have properties off the market for a week waiting around for inspections. So the fact that I've already taken the steps to schedule the inspection and schedule them for the next day, oftentimes, or 48 hours from the time I'm submitting the offer, again, it projects confidence. It shows the seller that if they do say yes to me ASAP, they can then, we can confirm and grab that slot on Monday afternoon, and they don't have to wait until Friday for me to do my inspections, right? It creates it creates urgency in the transaction because I'm pushing it forward. And oftentimes when I'm pushing it forward on the buyer side, that push continues on the listing side, and the sellers feel it and they're excited by it. Schedule the home inspection and the septic inspection. Again, if you haven't done it before, get those scheduled quickly afterwards. I still believe that you should schedule them and let the buyers know when you've scheduled them for. That way it's not on the buyer's schedule, it's on your schedule. If you, number 25, call the buyer's client's attorney and introduce yourself. Number 26, make sure you've received a copy of the contract information sheet that's typically prepared by the listing agent. Number 27, attend the home inspection. Number 28, attend the septic inspection. You want to be there. I ask that question a lot. Well, do I have to be there? Well, first of all, you're the licensee that represents the buyers. You can't be in someone else's, they can't be in someone else's house without you, right? There is this weird, sometimes myth that gets pushed around that says, well, the inspector is there, so I don't have to be. That is untrue, right? So if you hear that, you can say, well, I know that that's untrue because we covered that sucker right in this session. Even if the inspector is a licensee, he or she is not the broker of record for the buyers, right? That has to be you representing the brokerage. So I hope there's just no questions around that. You go to your inspections and be there the whole time. Don't start the inspection, go and show a house and come back. I've heard that as well. That's a perfect way to lose your license and go to realtor jail, right? Leaving people in somebody else's house. It doesn't even matter to me if you call the listing agent and say, is this okay if I do it? Don't call and ask that. And if for some reason you hear that it is okay, don't do it anyway. Number next, where are we? Number 29. Once all the inspections have been received, reports have been received, that usually takes a couple of days, right, to get the inspection reports back, 24, 48 hours. A lot of those things are now digitized, and so you don't have to sit and wait. Like back in my day, people were handwriting the reports, and so it oftentimes took some time. Now they're using apps and they're just on their tablet, and so they should be able to compile all that pretty quickly and get that off to you. What are you guys seeing? 24 up to 48 maybe hours, but no longer than that, right? Okay, great. So 24 to 48 hours. Once everything's been received, then you get to sit and review them with the buyer. Please don't do all that piecemeal, right? Wait until all the results come in, then sit down and have a holistic approach to your conversation, because that way buyers can see the things that are important versus not important. If the building inspection comes in first and they're all aflutter because there's no GFIs in the bathrooms because they're buying a 75-year-old house or a 50-year-old house or whatever, if all of a sudden one of the distribution boxes on the septic system is crushed and not functioning properly, right, that puts the GFIs in a little bit different perspective, right? And so now if there's something to ask for of the sellers, we're going to ask for the larger issue, right? And the GFIs can kind of retreat a little bit. Here's what I've learned over time. If you keep the list short and sweet, oftentimes sellers will address things, even in markets that are moving this quickly. If you keep it reasonable and short, sellers may address those things. Again, can't guarantee it. It's not 100% of the time. And yet, here's the best way to have sellers say, no thanks. Make a list as long as my arm and have it include stupid stuff. Right? If it's too lengthy and it includes stupid stuff, here's what happens. Either sellers say, these folks are unreasonable, so we're just not going to do anything. Or I've actually had sellers say, well, you know what? If they're asking for that much, say yes to some of the piddly stuff at the bottom and leave the important stuff for them. Right? That's one of those conversations you get to have with the buyer. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if we put in things that are more cosmetic in nature or are smaller, or are things that are likely to show up in a used home, I wouldn't shy away from that phrase. They're buying a used home, right? When you buy a used car, even if it's certified pre-owned, there could be a little ding or a scratch or whatever. Maybe there's a stain on the carpet, right? Stuff happens when you buy stuff used. And so my concern for you is if you're worrying about the small stuff, the sellers may say yes to the small stuff and not to the big stuff. Let's do ourselves a favor and shorten this up, tighten this up to make it the things that are ultimately really important to you. Yes, Debbie.
I learned this outside the state of Connecticut, and it applies really well inside the state of Connecticut. I encourage buyers to put in their offer, we will not make any issue of any item less than $2,500. In other words, all that piddly stuff, because there are going to be double taps, there are going to be leaky faucets, there are going to be cracked windows, and we're not going to make a deal of that. We will only bring up something, and I hate that expression, health and safety. I hate it. And yet you will hear it over and over again. I will only bring something up if it's a significant and unexpected issue. And that, in our parlance, we just quantify it to something that's going to likely cost more than $2,500.
You guys should write that down, significant and unexpected, because that's the conversation.
Up to $2,500 is the privilege of home ownership. And I use that expression. Like Rick said, you're buying a used house. It's gonna need some Band-Aids. Count on it.
So what Debbie just said is the buyer side version of what we discussed a couple of days ago about setting expectations on the seller side, right? What did I tell you on the seller side? Have a conversation that says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I encourage you to at least mentally set aside $3,000 just in case something comes back at the inspections, right? What Debbie just said is that script flipped for the buyers, right? And what I can guarantee you is if more of you would set those expectations with buyers and sellers, you wouldn't have transactions that fell apart at inspections. I personally don't think that there's ever a reason for a transaction to fall apart after inspections. Stuff that's wrong has to get fixed, and it has to get fixed by somebody. Let's just set proper expectations around who's responsible for what. The piddly stuff on the new buyers, something bigger, perhaps on the sellers, and then we work out a way that makes sense for everybody to move forward. But you'll struggle less if you'll set better expectations. Buying a home can sometimes cost more money. Selling a home can sometimes cost more money. And if we just are honest with people and let them know that, it's not a surprise when it shows up. And so the emotion has already been absorbed, and now they can just look at it objectively. Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that is a misconception is that anything that's out of code has to be brought up to code. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The buyer is permitted to do that after they own the home, but it does not have to be up to code to sell. Now, that doesn't mean that COs don't need to be obtained if work was done and blah, blah, blah. However, it's an as-is state.
Right. So in New Jersey, different conversation, right? When you sell property in New Jersey, the the city comes in, the whatever comes in, and there are inspections and you have to bring things to code. That's just not how it works here. So you have to make sure you're reminding the buyer clients that they are purchasing in an as-is state. And so sellers have zero obligation to address anything. That doesn't mean that they won't address some things, but they have zero obligation to address anything. And oh, by the way, that includes the septic system doesn't work, the roof is leaking, and the radon is high, right? There's no legal obligation. Now, there are practical obligations or practical paths forward here. If you have a failed septic system and there's a geyser in the front lawn every time somebody flushes, you know, clearly the seller just got unlucky, and it's very difficult to find a buyer with that issue in place. And so now you have to kind of figure out what the next step is. But there's not a legal obligation necessarily to correct the issue.
I have one question on that.
Yes.
How about it like with appliances? If the appliances are included, is there a legal, would that be something that would need to be fixed, or no, they're just included whether they're working or not?
Well, so if they're included and the gas range has one burner on the back left that doesn't light, it's an as-is state. So the appliances are conveying, and they're conveying as is. The buyer can certainly say, hey, you know, what's the deal with that back burner? Can you get it fixed? Or just recognize that they're buying used appliances.
Yeah, I just wasn't too sure if it was.
Yeah, as pretty much as is as is as is,
That is.
from top to bottom. If in fact there are inspection issues that come up and your buyers are looking to have a conversation around that, make sure that that list gets put in writing and sent over to the listing agent with some backup, right? You don't send the entire report over, but pull pages from a report so that the listing agent knows that there is some legitimate claim or some legitimate reason why they're being asked for. Sometimes additional people will have to be involved to qualify or quantify an issue, and sometimes the inspection report will be enough. But you're gonna package that and send that to the listing agent. You'll negotiate those inspection issues until both parties are in agreement, and then memorialize that in writing so that everyone is clear about what is expected to be done prior to the closing. Number 33, you're going to check in with the buyer and the buyer's mortgage loan officer, be certain that application has been made, right? You don't want to just assume that the buyer has made application. Just because they have a pre-qualification letter doesn't mean they've actually made application. I speak from experience. I have made that mistake, right? All of a sudden, weeks later, somebody asks about the appraisal, and you ask the buyers, well, you know, when is the appraisal going to be scheduled? Have you heard from the mortgage person? They're like, well, no, we haven't talked to the mortgage person yet. I'm sorry, what? Like, well, we got that letter. Do we have to do something else? Uh-huh. Now, again, you could look and say, wow, how stupid are the buyers? I didn't look at them that way. I looked at myself in the mirror and said, wow, you fell down on the job on that one. You missed an important check-in point to make sure the buyers had actually made application. Remember, we do this every day. They do it once every 7 to 10 years. And so it would be unreasonable for us to have an expectation that our buyers and our sellers just know the process and just continue on. It's why you have this checklist in front of you, right? So check in on that. Be mindful of the dates that were laid out in the original offer to purchase or the contract. Know what those dates are and make sure you're hitting them. Right? Be cognizant of that. Have conversations with people. Hey, the mortgage date's coming up. Where do we stand? Have the conversation with the attorney. How are we going to handle that if the mortgage isn't right? So be involved in all of that. Make sure you know what those dates are and that the process is on track. Meet the appraiser at the house, number 37. You can prepare 3 sold comps, the best 3 sold comps. Just don't make it and give it to the appraiser. Just don't make a big deal out of it. They will almost always take them. But if you make a big deal out of it and want to have a big, long discussion about it, they're not going to want to do that, and they're not going to take your stuff. So just like Oh, we didn't, well, so what I encourage you to do is just put the comps in an envelope, and right towards the end of the appraisal, you can simply say, you know what, I actually had some extra comps that we used on this, and so if it's helpful, and bada bing. That's it. 7 little words, hand them the envelope, and they'll take it because they'll be thankful. It saves them a little time. But again, if you want to sit and have a big long conversation around it, because they're not really supposed to be discussing it with you, which is why they sometimes will either reject what you hand them or not want to have a conversation. Just know that going in. I still encourage you to bring the best 3 sold comps, hand them off, and be quiet about it. Number 38, call the buyer, let them know the appraisal has been done. Once the mortgage has been approved on 39, be certain that the buyers and the loan officer and other processor have a handle on the conditions that will need to be met in order to obtain a clear to close, right? There's 2 steps to having mortgage approval. The first step is conditional approval. The second step is clear those conditions and then get a clear to close. Minimally, even if no conditions come back, most lenders, a day or 2 before the closing is scheduled, will go ahead and pull another soft credit pull to make sure that the credit hasn't changed, and do a verification of employment. Right, so minimally those kind of things hang out before you're clear to close. And if the buyers have a big long list, ask how you can help, right? Maybe they don't have any place to print or make copies, so you can offer them to come into the office and print or make copies. You can offer to scan things to the loan officer, right? However you might be able to assist in moving that along, those are the conversations that you're going to be having. Check in to make sure that the inspection repairs are moving along. You always want to make a little phone call a week or 2 before the closing, right? Hey, Debbie, it's Rick, just looking ahead a couple of weeks to the closing on 123 Main Street. And I just wanted to make sure that those inspection repairs had been handled, and that the attorneys are going to be provided with paid receipts, right? And I'm going to make that call, and Debbie's going to either say, yes, they're all handled and those receipts are done, or she's going to say, yes, they're being handled, even if that means she hangs up the phone and says, oh, crap, I have no idea what those things are. I better make some phone calls. Or I know they haven't been done. I better make some phone calls, right? That's why you make that call, because you're the one who's reminding everybody, not necessarily assuming that it's not done, but without the phone call, you might as well, you don't want to make that assumption and have it screw up the closing is the point, right? Check in with the MCA, make sure that we have invoiced the transaction. The 1% binder is already with the attorney, so we don't have to worry about that at the market center level anymore. Just like on the list side, sometimes there's a gap in between all the stuff going on and when you're going to close. Make sure you're filling the gap and having conversations. Again, I like a conversation or a touch every 48 to 72 hours, every 2 to 3 days. You want to be just in contact with people. You're doing routine check-in. You're reminding them about transferring their mail services, reminding them about getting their license updated at DMV. Do they need a source for movers? Do they need packing boxes? Do they need cleaners once they move into the house, right? Remind them also, do your loan officer a favor and everybody else involved a favor. Remind them that they cannot open any new lines of credit. Please don't go buy a boat or a car. Please don't quit your job, right? All these things that seem kind of silly, and yet every year we have people who show up 2 or 3 days before the closing and they've done one of those things that seems silly, that if we had just reminded them, maybe they wouldn't have done. Oh, you're kidding. I can't quit my job a week before the closing? No. If you hate your job, hang on and take a week's vacation. Quit the day after the closing, right? And again, these things happen. I know it sounds crazy, and they happen. And then you're going to set up the activities for closing day, which includes a final walkthrough. That's happening either the night before or the morning of, right? The final walkthrough ultimately is done for the following reason: to make sure that everything that worked the day of the inspection still works, all the major systems, that the house was left in the same condition as it was the day they inspected the property. And because people have moved out, so you want to make sure there's no holes in the walls or stuff like big stuff that that changes the condition. I'm not talking about the little tiny holes in the walls from pictures. That's not a walkthrough item. That's normal wear and tear. And you want to make sure that everything that was supposed to be left is still there, and everything that was supposed to be removed is actually gone, right? If any of those things are not the way that the buyers are expecting them to be, take some photos, text the photos to the attorney, and start having conversations with the attorney about how that will be addressed. We're not really attending closings anymore because even our buyers aren't attending closings much anymore. However, if you have an opportunity to be in the same room with your buyers at a closing, I would take them up on it, right? Go. It's not only is it a nice thing to do, you're the one who's been there from start to finish. If something goes wrong, the answer is probably in your folder for that transaction, right? And it's a perfect opportunity for you to get testimonials from the buyers that you can do either live and in person or do a quick video testimonial if you're there. Again, I know most of us are not going to closings much anymore because a lot of closings are just simple one-on-one with the attorney. And then, of course, you have your follow-up system, which is exactly the same as the orphan program as it is the seller program. Within 48 hours of closing on the property, those buyers need to hear from you. And then within 7 days, they need to hear from you again. And then within 30 days, they need to hear from you a third time. So within 30 days, they're hearing from you 3 times, once within 48 hours, once within the first week, once within the first month. What are you saying? Doesn't matter. Hey, it's Rick, just checking in. How's the house? How's unpacking going? Any issues that I can help with? Do you need, use me as a resource. Do you need any vendors? Hey, I realize it's the middle of summer. Do you have someone to mow the lawn? Hey, I realize it's the middle of winter. Do you have someone to plow the driveway if it snows, right? Any connection reason. Here's the struggle we have. Agents don't follow up after the close, which is why I'm asking you to do it 3 times in the first 30 days. You want to set yourself apart, follow that system. Why do agents not do it? Because they're afraid. I think we've said that a lot in the last couple of days, right? Fear prevents a lot of really best practices from happening. We're afraid that what if something did happen? Guys, if they moved in and 12 hours later, the dishwasher exploded and ended up on the front lawn, unless you went and made the dishwasher explode, you have nothing to be guilty about, right? Instead, it's important that you call and say what happened, and they say the dishwasher exploded, it's out on the front lawn. You say, oh my goodness, how can I help? I can't believe that occurred. Did you turn the water off? Did you call this person? Do you need a plumber? Is there a home warranty? Should we be calling this? Like, you get into action around that. And the only way you can get into action to help somebody out is if you know what's going on. The only way you'll know what's going on is if you actually care enough to make a phone call. Make sense? So don't leave all that out. It's really important to follow up. Crazy, crazy important. And then, of course, those people are going to go into your drip campaign, your 36 touch, and get followed up over and over and over and over again. Guys, that is the anatomy of a buyer transaction. We squeaked it out with just being 3 minutes over. What we didn't have time for was the cat house story. And so here's my promise to you. You can either go and look at it online over the weekend, or if you choose to come on Monday at 2 o'clock, when I'm going to do the one piece of the buyer consult we didn't get to, which is take the close for the agreement script and overlay that on top of the buyer agreement, so you can see how that script dovetails with that document. That we're doing at 2 o'clock on Monday. If you come to that, we'll finish that in a half hour. I will tell the cat house story after we do that. So again, I appreciate you being here. I hope this was a helpful couple of weeks for you and with each other. I appreciate everyone's time, attention, questions, contributions, more than you can possibly imagine. I love to spend time on this material with each of you, and I hope you'll take this from here and start using it, right? use it to create opportunity for yourself, use it to list buyers and list sellers, use it to create transactions, and mostly use it to go out and do really good work in the world, right? Use all this information to be a conduit for good in whatever small way in our industry we can do that. Make people smile, bring people some joy, and make sure people get treated the way they deserve to get treated in a business transaction. Let's just set the example for the rest of the industry about how this goes down. We will see you soon, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock perhaps, and if not, I'll see you on Monday. Have a great evening, guys. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank
Rick.
you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks,
Sure
Rick.
thing.
Thank you.